All right, as I said when we began meeting on Second Sunday, the purpose is to hopefully inform a biblical perspective on the matters that we've been talking about. And that is certainly needful even now, especially as we see coming before us, perhaps um, the most clearly defined differences between candidates, between parties, between the motivations of those who are either supporting or against various ones. Um, there is a greater divide, not only amongst the difference between these people politically, but the very ideas that they promote. Um, And that's troubling to see. I know we used to live in a world, even I remember a time when the differences between the parties were notable, but they weren't so great that we were at each other's throats about who was right and who was more honorable or more deserving or whatever. Um, so it's important for us as Christians to begin with a biblical backdrop for how we're going to view what we're discussing today. And what I mean is that we're able to clearly define the battle that we're in. And by defining it, to know what the sides are that are involved. From the very beginning of history, as we read in our Bibles together, the sides are drawn. The differences between two positions that you can take, and there's really only two, and it just gets developed from there. You see it in the first law that was given to Adam while he was in the garden. In Genesis 2, there in your outline you have it, verses 16 and 17. And the Lord commanded the man, you are free to eat of any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat of it, you will surely die. The clear line that is being drawn there is there's an action that can be taken that leads to life, and there's an action that you can take that leads to death. From the very beginning, there was presented to man a way that leads to life and the way that leads to death. And he could make a choice either way, and the rest of the story kind of tells us how that went. When the serpent came and tempted the woman, the temptation was simply this: God has lied to you, right? He made the suggestion, at least, when he said, did God really say this? He interjected the possibility that what God might have said was not, in fact, the truth. But he then tells Eve and her husband, who was right there with her, you can choose your own way. You will not die. The serpent proves himself to be a liar, right? Because the curse surely tells us that the consequences were just what God said they would be. They would be death. The nature of the battle is again stated for us by Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 30, if you want to turn there and read with me. Deuteronomy chapter 30, beginning in verse 11. We remember at the end of Deuteronomy, it's the last words from Moses to the people that he's been leading into and through the wilderness for 40 years. And he tells them this in verse 11. He says, now what I'm commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in heaven so that you have to ask, who will ascend into heaven to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart so you may obey it. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. This day I'll call heaven and earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As we read on in the history of ancient Israel, we discover the choices that they in fact made, even after Moses clearly warned them. It's plainly seen that they were drawn into the pagan beliefs that were idolatrous to the Lord. Their idolatry led to further lawlessness, right? They compromised in many ways when they abandoned the faithful covenant with God. And it was lawlessness. It was not just free citizens choosing to express differing opinions. It's not the way to see it. The people of Israel had entered into a covenant with God to be his people. That's the way we read it. They made a show every year of reasserting that commitment to God, as if to make anew that commitment year after year. But they were breaking their covenant. And in God's eyes, they were committing adultery in their relationship with him. That's the way he defines it. They were choosing their own way, and it led to death and destruction. In the Gospels, these two sides are revealed to us again. And we see it clearly in the pitched opposition to Jesus and his authority and his identity as the promised Messiah. And John chapter 8 is the pivotal chapter that really illustrates this clearly for us. We can see the two sides at work right there. If you want to read with me in John 8, beginning in verse 42, we've read that recently. Let's hear it again. Verse 42, Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God and now am here. I have not come on my own, but he sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? If I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? He who belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God." John goes on here for us. He says, "The Jews answered him, 'Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?'" Now, mind you, this is the same people that just a few verses back said, "And they believed in him." Well, the level of belief was quickly shattered when he began to challenge them about that. And here they are now accusing him of being a Samaritan and demon-possessed. Verse 49, "I am not possessed by a demon," said Jesus, "but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I am not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. I tell you the truth, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death." At this, the Jews exclaimed, "Now we know you are demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say that if anyone keeps your word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are?" Jesus replied, "If I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father, whom you claim is your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. You are not yet 50 years old," the Jews said to him, "and you have seen Abraham? I tell you the truth," Jesus answered. "Before Abraham was born, I am." No questions about what Jesus is saying about himself. They understood what he was saying, the claim that he was making. And indeed, it's true, the claim that he made there. But chapter 8 reveals to us not only who Jesus is and who he knew he was, right? He knew he was the one that was sent from God, the Messiah. He existed before time. He said, "I am." He used the word of the name of God in his response to them, clearly saying, we are the same. We are one. But we also see here in John 8 is this. We see clear markers. We see characteristics that identify the other side. The enemy to God and to life is Satan. And he is a murderer, as Jesus said, and a liar. And again in John 10, just turn a page over there, Jesus is plain here as well. He says in verse 10 there, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy." That's what he does. "But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." The sides are clearly marked for us. We as Christians, knowing these things, should feel confident in being able to assess the enemy that we are facing. If anyone or any organization or any political party or any movement in any way has within its message and actions what can be clearly defined as stealing, as lying, as killing, and as destroying, then we can know what side they're on, right? The last thing we ever wanted to do as free people in a country who have a democratic process of electing its representatives to government is to accuse the other side of being in league with the enemy of life. But I dare say those days are upon us. They are here with us now. They have been working, and he has been working tirelessly to bring us to this point. First, we must accept that there's no perfect candidate. There just isn't. There's no perfect candidate that might hold a position that is biblical on every issue or on every policy. We're talking about mere men and women here. There's no way you're going to have a perfect candidate. Not anyone that is perfectly consistent with the position even that you or I may hold on the issues. But I do feel confident in saying that there are candidates that hold better positions than the other side. They are closer on the issues that matter most. And we should pay attention to that. Second, we're not saying that every politician that doesn't agree or hold our positions on important issues is a Satan worshiper. We're not saying that. Although a few of them I think are a little more driven than others. And we're not going to say that about the people who would vote for them, right? Knowingly or not, maybe they don't understand. Maybe they're not informed. Maybe they don't obsess over YouTube commentary like some of us do. Maybe they're just not aware of what's happening in their own world at this point. And they lived in a time when they shouldn't have had to worry about it, right? We should expect those people that want to rise to positions of power to represent people that they live among would do the right thing. That they don't. Not all of them. That's where we are. I would, however, say this, that as a person who claims to be a follower of Christ, we must hold the biblical position on the issues that really matter. We must. We're responsible to do that. Our position should be the one that we can clearly define and defend in God's Word. And those issues center around the life, around humanity, and around justice, for sure. Are there Christians who hold positions on these matters that are not biblical? Yes. Are they true Christians? I'll leave that to the Lord. But there are some that are claiming to be followers of Jesus who do not hold positions that they can defend by the Scripture. Why did God give us the Bible to begin with if we can make up our own minds? He's given us His truth. It's meant to define who we are. And sadly, some of those Christians were standing in pulpits this morning, preaching to a congregation. It's amazing the number of denominations and individual churches that have decided to take positions that we would say clearly are not biblical, and they promote and teach them. I know Beth has mentioned this to others maybe, but I know certainly to me that she has people in her past who would have been comfortable 30 years ago in, I say this is not really derogatory, I'm just making a comment, Battle Axe Baptist down the road, in the small highway road down there. They would have been comfortable in a strong, fundamentalist type of church. And today, 30 years later, they're in places that are clearly compromised, promoting identity politics and queer ideas. Queer meaning anything but normal, right? And you just want to sit down and say, how'd you get here? How'd you get from there, Bible college in Western Kentucky, to here, saying and preaching and teaching the things that you are now? I must also say this, that there are candidates on the ballot this year that hold positions that are not perfect, but they are clearly better than the other side. Markedly better. On these issues, which I believe I listed in your outline, on the issue of life, here's the biblical position. To be pro-choice is to be pro-death, and thus pro-murder, which is why they can argue some other issues which may not have time to talk about. Again, there are no perfect candidates on this issue. They're not. Not on the ballot. So what do? You look for the one that's closest to the position you hold, in the prayer that if I elect a good person or someone that would have good positions or a good intention, we'll get something even better. And I'll give you an example of that. President Trump has not changed, former president, has not changed his position on abortion. The way it is now is the way it was in 2016 when he was elected. Not perfect, but he did understand that there should be some protections. And so he set policy to do that. But the second thing he did, which was more important, is he nominated Supreme Court justices who would address the issue of Roe versus Wade. It had been brought up before the Supreme Court for years, and no one ever brought a case that they would hear. And then finally, they did. And now there's no federal protection for this issue, and he did the right thing. He sent it back to the states. Now your battle is within your state. It's right here, and you can engage in that battle right here. He's not perfect, but he's better, because the other candidate wants no restrictions whatsoever, no safeties on the issue of abortion. None whatsoever. So if you have someone in your life, either through Facebook or someone that says, I just can't vote for him because he doesn't want to abolish abortion. Well, there's not a candidate on the ballot that will, but he is at least moving in the right direction and providing us an opportunity to defend our position within the state, which is a much easier battle. And we've done good work here in Tennessee with that regard. That's an amazing victory in my word. Amazing victory. Another issue, the issue of humanity itself. Are we going to allow humanity to be defined by what's visible and real and meaningful as it has always been? Or are we going to accept that there's a whole nother mystery that we need to adopt in order to define who men and women are, who boys and girls are? The enemy to life has introduced this issue into our politics. It's the issue of identity, claiming that a made-up category of gender, and it is made up. We never talked about gender 15 years ago. We never talked about it. But now it's been pushed forward as the way to think. And gender apparently is a sacred choice that's decided for by every individual. You can choose for yourself. So for me to tell them that that decision, by the way, I have to tell you the truth, that decision was already made by God. For me to say that openly is hate speech to these people. There are candidates that are actively defending the above issue, and they want it to continue and go forward. There are candidates who are willing to stand against it. And they'll do so for the sake of my kids and the kids that follow us, the next generation and the next. Because we have children who will not have children now because their families and they themselves, and in some instances public officials, even teachers and school officials, have intervened and allowed these children to take on treatments that will render them sterile, all for the sake of pushing forward an ideology. Family's going to be taken away from them. They'll never have that opportunity. They don't even know if they know what they want at this point. But they're being brutalized, and it's criminal what's happening. There's a whole bunch of people that want that to go on and get even deeper into our society. And there are a group of people that are taking a stand against it. That's better. And we should seek them out, and we should encourage them, and we should support them, and we should vote for them. Right? They may not be perfect on the issue, but they're better. How about the issue of war? One of the reasons we started talking about war is because there's a history of war being used unjustly in the world over the last 100 years. There are candidates in both parties, I'm sad to say, who are bought and paid for at this point. Bought and paid for, and I'm going to use the word our former President Eisenhower did, so why not? Why would I be afraid of saying the military-industrial complex when he did? And he said it's a real threat, and he knew it was coming, and we didn't stop it when we should have. These men and women who run these companies are not loyal Americans. They are globalist in thinking. Globalist all the way. They make money making the tools of war. They make more money when there is a war. They make more. They have no qualms in seeing war break out upon our planet, because that's an opportunity, an economic opportunity for them. So those people who were voting to send money and weapons to Ukraine, and mind you, very little of that money went to Ukraine. Most of it went into the pockets of those people making the armament that they were going to send over there. And at this point, none of it goes over there. All they're doing is giving money under the guise of supporting Ukraine to these corporations who are making the tools of war to replace what we've already sent over there, because now we are radically underarmed if there were a serious threat against our own country. Well, they claim they're supporting Ukraine, but that's not what's happening. I gave you a quote from JFK. You may know this. He said, "Get domestic policy wrong and people suffer." It's the world we're living in right now. But he also said this: you get foreign policy wrong and people die. Are you for death or against it? When our neighboring state, their senator, heads over to visit with the strangely positioned president of Ukraine and tells them, more dead Russians. That's what we want, is more dead Russians. That's evil. On any level. That's evil. So we got to get it right. There is a candidacy out there that's right on the issue of war and says it has to stop. We don't need to commit ourselves, our resources, and certainly not our men and women to any issue involving war that doesn't involve any interest to the United States. We shouldn't be doing it. The other side is all in. All in. How about the issue of justice? There are powers working to subvert the rule of law in this country. Hard to imagine, but it's real. They've corrupted our justice system. How did they do that? They infiltrated the ranks of city and state offices in the district attorney office. They moved in there and began to exercise a kind of justice that's not in line with what's written on the books in our country and in these cities and in these states. And they're not prosecuting lawbreakers under this motive that we're exercising social justice. You know what the argument is for allowing people who steal merchandise up to a level of $900 in California is? Oh, well, that's just another way to make things more equal. Those are things that those people couldn't get because they're oppressed. And so it's a justice matter. And so we're not going to prosecute people who steal from businesses, who are trying to operate and keep people hired and employed and make a profit so that they can feed their families. Social justice requires this. This is what's so un-American about it, that some people be treated more equal than others. It's reparations. It's all argued as reparations, and it's unjust. It's not written in the books, and it shouldn't be happening, and yet it is. They're making policy decisions, and those decisions eventually become laws, and they're redefining the very matter of what is theft and what is murder. Redefining it. It's destructive. It's destructive to many, if not all, of the institutions in our society. And that's the point. They intend to tear it down so that they can rebuild it the way they want it to be. Each of these issues is as important as the other. That's what we have to come to terms with. All of these issues are important, vastly important. Whether it's the issue over life, are we pro-life? Are we pro-human? Isn't it okay to be human? We could have thrown the environmental issue in there as well, because many of those people are saying, well, we got too many humans. They just need to go for sake of the environment. Where are you on war? Where are you on justice? Does the rule of law matter? Especially when that law is written, coded into our law, but it reflects the law that was given to the people of Israel that we find in our Old Testament. That's the basis for our law. All of these issues are important, and they must be addressed if our culture is going to continue, if our society is going to go on. They have to be addressed. Solving one of these issues will not win the war. It won't win it. So you can't be a single issue voter. You got to think about it all, and you got to think about it right. And the principle is this: you cannot sacrifice the good for sake of the perfect. Yeah, there's no perfect candidate. Nobody's perfect on all the issues. But many of them are better, and they're closer to the truth, and they're closer to Scripture. We must look for them. We have two weapons that we can use as believers. Two weapons at our disposal. One is truth, and the other is the freedom to say it. Who would have thought? But it needs to be defended, right? We have the truth, and we have the ability to say it right now. And the loudest voice you can engage with freely today is your vote. You can send the loudest message by voting consistently for the good. We're on one side or the other. As Christians, we by nature signed up to fight in His army. That's part of it being a Christian, right? We signed up for this. This is why Paul defines it the way he does in Ephesians 6. There's no getting around his language. We know exactly what he's talking about here. In Ephesians 6, verse 10, he says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes." Paul didn't say random opponents who have no foundation. No, he said the devil and his schemes. The sides are clear. We don't have to wonder about them. In verse 12, he says this: "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." It is a struggle. It is a battle. And we're meant to engage in it. We've been recruited to do that. Let me give you another perspective. If we do not engage the enemy in this battle, we'll be counted as deserters. Too many Christians for too long have just left the battlefield and said, well, y'all figure it out. The difference in the last election could be summed up in the difference in the percentage of people who call themselves Christians voting, actually engaging in the vote or not. If you had included everybody, it was a shoo-in. If Christians had seen that one is clearly better than the other and not believed the lies, had done the homework and seen through what they were being told about one candidate or the other, and gone to the ballot box and actually placed their vote, we wouldn't be here. It wouldn't be like it is now. But they didn't. They stayed home. They didn't engage. They deserted the field. And don't forget, deserters are always counted with the enemy. That's why the penalty for desertion is what? Let's not do that. It seems unreal that you and I would have to sit together like we are and have to deal with the idea that there are waffling attitudes among the Christians in our lives. People are going, I just don't know. I don't know what to do. About participating, about being involved in their civic duty. How did we get here as a church? The absence of evangelical voters, and they're not a guarantee. None of them think, not all of them think rightly about these matters, that's for sure, but their absence in the ballot box is significant. And what most of them don't know or understand is that it is the intent of the other side, the ones who claim to be oppressed. It is their intent, those who don't want to live according to the just law of God, to find a way to create disenchantment or melees among other people. That's part of the plan. Have you had a conversation with anyone lately or felt within your own heart that it doesn't matter? What's it worth? How can it make a difference? They planned that, and they're working to make you think that. And there are many in our culture today who are saying, my vote won't matter. Put a bunch of those together, and then suddenly it does matter, right? There's plenty who simply give up. They don't participate. There are many forces at work in our culture today to demoralize those who would wish to see our culture and society return to some kind of normalcy, right? Just want things to go back to where things were stable. Things made sense. Well, that's absolutely not what they want. They want to break it all down. But they can't get around the fact that for most of us there is a desire for normalcy, where we all come together and we agree that there's some basic truths that are just always true, and they're reflective of reality. The common sense, right? You look at it and you go, I know what's going on there. That exists. And as a result of seeing the world that way, there's some basic good that comes from that, by accepting things as they are and saying, this is the way it works, so this is what we must do. But the more these other forces tell you, and enforce it by the power of the law at this point, to reject what we all know in our hearts is true and right, the more demoralized we become. How could they do that? Why would they do that? And you walk away going, ugh, you can't make a difference. That's planned. Let me give you an example of this. This is the way they really destroy. In some ways, lately, they've stoked a fire, which is good to see. But in many ways, they've destroyed our belief that the system can work. Here's an example. There are some states in our union that are enshrining what used to be defined as gender confusion. But they're enshrining it. They're making it something much more important than what it is. And the phrase you may hear is this, and you've seen it on signs maybe if you pay attention to the story. Transgender people are sacred. What does that mean? Untouchable. You can't argue against it. You got to leave it alone. It's sacred. And they're doing this with elementary age children. And they're empowering state schools to recommend and administer permanent life-altering treatments without the consent of that child's parent. This is written into the law in Minnesota, by the way. The vice presidential candidate, who is now currently the governor, signed that law. And if the parents, and let's just use them as an example, in Minnesota, seek to intervene, this is true in California as well, and stop this molestation from happening, the state has empowered itself to terminate the parent's rights and deliver that child into the hands of activists who have created this injustice. How did the world get here? Add this. This is why it's so demoralizing. These same states are protecting the wholesale killing of innocent children inside the womb, defending what they call reproductive freedom. Now you see the problem? On one hand, children and their emotional whims are sacred and must be protected. But on the other hand, children are disposable. How can both be true? What we have to see clearly is that both positions do the very same thing. They destroy children. And that's the point. The other side will cry and yell that they are the righteous ones. They are the compassionate ones. They are the ones who really know how the world works. And anyone who opposes them is not just unkind, but you're people filled with hatred. And people who hate others must be silenced. And it's not a stretch, because they've said it themselves, that if you will not keep your hate-filled opinions to yourself, then you are worthy of execution. Case in point, the Democratic Convention is just about to launch days before an attempt on the former president's life was taken. A matter of inches, and we would have a very different story today. And so a man on the street goes out onto the streets there in Chicago where the convention's taking place, just to ask people who are there. So what is your opinion on the assassination attempt of the former president? Oh, well, I'm sorry they missed. If you didn't hear that, that was real. You can watch it. Because he's worthy of execution, because he doesn't agree and support their positions. He's not just an opponent. He's a demon in their eyes. But anyone who would advocate for death just because they don't agree with you, I know what side they're on, right? Make no mistake, we are dealing with people today who are not freedom-loving Americans, who just hold a different opinion than you do. These are revolutionaries. They want to tear it down. They want to destroy your freedoms. This is why they talk about rewriting the Constitution. John Kerry, a man who held position for years as a senator in Washington, D.C., and was asked to be Secretary of State under Obama at one point, over in Europe just weeks ago, talking to political elites in Europe, making the open statement, yeah, the First Amendment is a real problem for us. That tells you where he is. I should have added to the list freedom of speech, because once you lose that, everything else tumbles. Everything else falls. They want to destroy it and recreate the world in their image, for sure. I've given you some books to read. I don't recommend them. I just suggest them lightly because they're hard. I mean, you really want to bum your day out, read a couple of these things right here, but they're informative if you're not sure you understand the world in which you live today. I brought 3 of them with me if you want to take a look at them. One is an older book written in the late 70s by Richard Wurmbrand. If you don't know Wurmbrand, he's the individual that started the organization Voice of the Martyrs. If you know a little bit about what they do, they are trying to make people aware, Christians aware, of places where active persecution is taking place against the church and against Christians, and telling their stories. Richard Wurmbrand was a Lutheran pastor who was imprisoned in a Romanian prison under the communist rule over there. I don't know how long he was in there, but I want to think it was over 20 years. And if you know anything about what communist prisons look like, that's rough. But he wrote a book, and he did his research looking at the background for Karl Marx, and he wrote this book called Marx and Satan, and he makes some very, very strong assertions that Marx, who used to be in his youth a professing believer and actually went to seminary in his first few years out of high school, was taken under the wing of an atheist who taught at that same seminary and sought to undermine Christian faith wherever he went, by the last name of Hess, I think Rudolph. But it's a very interesting tale that aligns clearly demonic forces at play in the formation of Marxism, which was already beginning even before Karl Marx writes his little tract, as they call it. But very interesting read. You can find it and download it from archive.org. There's one other source online. You can get it free. Just download it and read it on your tablet or your phone. Very interesting read. As are all of them, that might be helpful to just inform yourself. No one has time to read them all before election, but it is there to look at. So that's an earful. what questions might we have to work through this evening?